having to do with the city. Just a little bit of background on me before we jump into it, so you know I've got a little bit of credibility, is that I've been a planner for about 30 years. I've been a consultant most of that time. I started out working for the county of Riverside. But even before I did that, I grew up in Riverside, and I spent a lot of time in the summers at Newport Beach. This is such a great town. I spent a lot of time at the crab cookers. I got a little older. I spent some time at Little Dunes. I'll have to admit that. And I love this town, and I can see why you all live here and love it as well, because it's a great place not just to visit from somebody out of town, but to raise your family here, to work here, to go to school here, and really just to be a part of the community and preserve those things that you love about the community. Something that Mr. B did mention before we got underway is this term growth. And is a general plan about growth? I think Melanie repeated it. It's not necessarily. It's about what you want your community to be. It's about setting the rules for decision making in your community. So let's first talk a little bit about the planning context, how you got to the general plan that you have today. It was started, believe it or not, back in 2001, and it started with establishing a vision. This visioning process, how many of you were involved in the visioning process starting back in 2001? And I have to admit, I was surprised to read when I was doing a little bit of background research. The company that I work for today actually worked with your community on that vision plan. So MIG was hired back in 2001 to do the vision. I was with another company at the time, but it's good to know that there's pretty good foundation working with the vision. So that it started back in 2001. Just to think back about what type of world events were happening in 2001. We all remember that was the day that America was the year that America was impacted by attacks on its own soil. Thank goodness for our first responders. We're going to use this building today who were there and helped us remember 2001. But it went through January of 2003. You remember events in 2003. Again, that's thinking back long in time. Guess what? Roger Federer and Venus Williams won Wimbledon that year. Oh, wait, that might happen today, too, right? I'm thinking that for this general plan program, you want to get it finished so that Roger and Venus are still on the circuit playing tennis. This is, 15 years or so ago that they were doing that. You hope that it's not going to be another 15 years before the next general plan is finished. Once the vision was established, that allowed the community to move forward to put the plan together with the vision as the foundation. It took about a 3-year process. There was a 38-member General Plan Advisory, GPAC committee. Was anybody in this room on the GPAC? Great. And how was the experience? And Mr. Beek was as well. It was good. Would you do it again?
Oh, yeah.
All right, excellent. So I love having general plan advisory committees when I do general plan updates, because you learn so much from a very diverse group of people, and it helps you shape what you want to go back out and ask the balance of the community as well. So the GPAC is usually representative of the community, but it gives you the ideas to ask the broader community what their vision is and how that vision can be implemented. The GPAC had 50 plus meetings. That, in my book, is a record. That's a lot of meetings. And all of those were open to the public. Anybody could come and speak and listen. So it was, I'm sure, a very laborious process, but it resulted in a plan that, maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, and some of you who were involved in that process and know the plan, established a foundation that pretty much represented the vision of the community. We'll come back to that because that's important. But there were other public workshops, and there was also finally the entire engagement process resulted in or ended in planning commission and city council hearings. So your decision makers need to adopt the plan in the end and make sure that they adhere to it over time. Well, guess what? Since 2006. There has been an average of 4 general plan amendments a year. Over 40 plus the plan was adopted. Now those might be little individual, parcel specific. In fact, the state law only allows a city to amend its general plan 4 times a year, because if you're setting the rules in place with your general plan, you're not going to be allowed to go willy-nilly and changing it all the time. So there is a limit on how many times you can update the general plan every year, 4 times. Newport Beach has done about that every year. You can group general plan amendments, but really you're not supposed to amend it more than that because you need to stay focused on what the vision is. When I was looking through what those lists were of the amendments, a lot of them were to change a property from one use to another. And Jim, right, you brought up the example of a Japanese restaurant, probably currently planned for commercial use. Somebody has bought the property and wants to develop a assisted living or a senior housing project on it, which isn't allowed under your current laws, so you have to do a general plan amendment. Those were what most of the amendments were requesting over the last 12 plus years, was to change what was envisioned on the property to something else. Your plan has to be able to anticipate that those types of things are going to happen, because we can't always look 20 years into the future and understand where markets are going to head and where demands are. And so it's reasonable to expect that there are going to be some requests to change land use over time. So keep that in mind as you go through the general plan update process. Is your vision needs to be not laser focused, but you need to be broadly focused to anticipate a much longer time frame than tomorrow or next week or next year. The general plan that you have today consists of several chapters, or what are called elements. And I know those of you who have been involved in this understand that under state law, that's the way a plan is supposed to be set up. There are actually there's 7.5 or 8 required elements. Does anybody know what those elements are of the general plan? I won't ask you to memorize. Okay, Andy, you're going through them. I think you know them. I'm going to give you an easy mnemonic device to remember. Lunch stop, land use, noise, conservation, housing, safety, open space, and conservation. Lunch stop. Those are the things that have to be in your general plan. As of about a year ago, there was an 8th item that the state says you need to address, and that's something called environmental justice. So making sure that all community members, regardless of their station in life, their race, their income level, they are being equally addressed in the planning process. That's probably more important in communities like Compton or Colton or other places that have experienced discrimination or other forms of anti-environmental justice. Maybe not so much the case in Newport Beach, but that's something your plan is going to have to address, is this topic of environmental justice. And it can be interwoven throughout the plan or addressed in whatever manner the community feels is important. The last thing at the bottom is something that we want to focus on today, and that's implementation, because that gives your decision makers the marching orders, if you will, as to how to implement the plan. So that's really where a lot of effort needs to be focused on in the general plan, is implementation. And you've probably all heard this before, right? That's probably not news. It's one thing to plan, but it's how do you make all of these things happen? Let me go back a minute to the vision, because that's probably something that, as part of this process, the community is first going to revisit, is to make sure that the vision statement in your current general plan, it's not very long. It's only about 3 or 4 pages, so it took 2 years to produce 3 or 4 pages, but this is deep and meaningful because it is your foundation. Just like a house needs to be built on a solid foundation, this is the foundation for Newport Beach. It talks about community character, preserving the neighborhoods that you treasure and live in. And I apologize, this is not coming up the way I programmed it. I think it's just another version of PowerPoint. But there's a growth strategy in the general plan. The plan has a vision for a healthy environment. The Back Bay, Banning Ranch, which we can talk a little bit about. The plan sets a vision for efficient and safe circulation, for balanced community services that meet the needs of the community as it evolves over time, for recreation opportunities, whether you want to be out kayaking on the ocean or playing baseball or even going to the Senior Citizen Center for, I don't know, canasta or whatever anybody plays anymore. I don't even know if you play canasta anymore. I don't even know what it is. The airport, that has been probably something that you have been very focused on for a long time. One of the things that SPON has been a driving force on is making sure that the community is not impacted adversely by overflights from John Wayne Airport. And lastly, and this I think was pretty visionary for a plan written in 2006, is to make sure that you have a vision and policies to address responsive government. And I'm going to show you what your vision is for responsive government today. This is in your general plan. This is indicating that you want to make sure that your council, your planning commission, all of your decision makers are accountable and are implementing the goals and the policies and the vision that you as residents and business owners of Newport Beach set out.
That was extremely controversial.
Was it? What made it controversial?
It was introduced by Tom. I don't remember his name. He lived down on the peninsula. And he wanted something like that. He had actually stronger language than that. And staff and the city council were like, no, we don't want that. But the GPAC really insisted on that. They just felt that was something, because there were a number of people who felt that it had been very unresponsive council. And just as another aspect that wasn't listed up there, but the things, the words, we spent so much time on just the individual words. And one of the critical parts was the order of residents, business, and visitors. And that was something that GPAC emphasized again and again. Residents came first, and that was why that order was so critical.
And that's good to know, because when you pick it up, people don't think about that when they're reading it. But to understand what went into that, and to know that that same deep level of thinking will go into an update of the plan is very important. Again, I think you just pointed out the importance of a general plan advisory committee, to have a voice of the residents advocating for everybody in the community as the plan goes forward through the public hearing process. So maybe you'll want to keep this in for your next general plan.
Doesn't do much good.
Given that it's there,
We're working on it.
You're working on it. Let's talk about some tools today that you might be able to use to build accountability in the general plan. This is not an eye chart. I apologize. I'm going to show you a couple of exhibits that I'm not expecting you to read. Melanie, I think I gave you the PDF, so you can print this out and you can all have this later. But what I would recommend that you think about doing as a group, as the city's thinking about whether or not they want to update the general plan, is to go through the general plan very carefully. And maybe you've done this already, and maybe you can divide it up into committees by element of people's area of interest, and list all of the goals and policies. Put them in a workbook and indicate whether or not are they still relevant. Do you want to keep them moving forward? Should they be amended? Maybe they've been accomplished and you need to you get rid of it, or it needs to be tweaked a little bit. So if you can go through and look at all of the goals and policies and be ready with that, that's thinking ahead. And it's also a check for accountability. Hey, we said this. Has it been done? And that's going to be particularly important. This is an example that I'm using from a community I'm working in right now, Whittier, just up the road a piece, where they had a very detailed implementation program. And you can see that the implementation measures are going to be very pointed. For example, they indicate that they want to make sure there are people in City Hall, staff in City Hall, actively advocating with the Air Quality Management District to address air quality issues in Whittier. And so I think as we're going through this process, we're asking, have you done that? Why haven't you done that? Has it been a budgeting issue? Has it not been a priority of councils as they change over time? So you can use a matrix like this to understand what your council has done, and importantly, what you want to be doing moving forward. Here are some example goals and policies from the Newport Beach General Plan today. I have to say, this plan is probably more detailed than any one that I've looked at. There are a lot of focus areas that the plan puts together. I think there are probably 16 maps that looked at areas, distinct communities and districts throughout Newport Beach with very specific policies for each one. I think because of that level of detail, that might be the reason why you've seen so many general plan amendments, because the level of specificity that it got to, while important to indicate your direction, may be hamstringing some properties that might want to change over time. So as you look through your goals and policies, you'll notice that there is a lot of detail that you'll need to suss out. Not just for land use, but for example, this is from your circulation element. One of the key policies is to promote construction of a comprehensive trail system. There's a map in the plan showing a trail system. It would be great to go and look at that map and see, have we built those trails? Are they being budgeted? Are they in the capital improvement plan? Has anybody been tracking things at this level of detail as part of this group? Jim, you are. He's a one-man band over here. He needs some support. He needs a drummer. He needs a bass player.
So Laura, one workshop we did was just going through the implementation plan, and we've struggled, or some of us have struggled, with the lack of accountability as it pertains to the implementation and the implementation plan with this city council, and actually the last one too. So I think, and the planner from even Fullerton said they were having difficulty keeping accountability based on their implementation plan. So I don't know if you have any, if you have any suggestions. Because the detail, certainly could be the detail and the staffing required to manage that process of implementation plan review is pretty labor intensive, I would imagine.
It is, but I worked in Manhattan Beach about 10 or 12 years ago to do their general plan, and they wanted to put a lot of focus on the implementation plan, which we put together in a very large matrix. And the city council uses that as part of their budgeting process. I also, and this is going to sound awful, but if I'm working on a general plan and I'm sitting with staff for the first time, I said, this is your chance to be greedy when you're doing a general plan or the implementation plan in particular. What are your goals for your department over the next 5 to 10 years? Because if you put it into the implementation plan, when it comes time to do your budgets every year, you can go back to that and say, the reason I want to build this trail is because it's in the implementation plan that we do this. And that's how the implementation plan should be being used. It should be being used by departments to accomplish what their department goals are, and from residents to have that accountability. You're right, Dorothy, it is tough to do that, but if you don't have that list, if you don't have a to-do list, nothing will get done.
I don't know. I had to manage the implementation plans when I was working in the corporate world, and if I didn't, I got written up. I had to get everything that was said accomplished for my project, not for a whole city, but it's a challenge.
The only way that happens really in a community is every 4 years you have a chance to, for each individual, whether or not the goals are being accomplished as they
Yes, I understand that completely. Thank you.
Let's look at just one or two more here. This is from your historic resources element, also from your noise element. Just because I want to. Number 7.4, consider eliminating the use of leaf blowers by the city and discourage their use on private property. Is this something the city wants to do? You did. Great. You can check that one off.
For the residents.
But I was just surprised to see this level of detail in your plan. That must have really bothered a lot of people. Banning ranch. This is, if you look at the top level policy for banning ranch, it was to do all that the city could to acquire it for open space. Realizing that is probably going to be very tough to do just because of the money associated with it. It's been a tremendous battle. I just finished work on the Costa Mesa general plan a couple of years ago, and we were watching with great interest because a lot of Banning Ranch traffic was going to be going through on 19th Street through Costa Mesa. And there wasn't anything Costa Mesa could really do about it except for try to not have Banning Ranch happen. And the Coastal Commission has pretty much said right now that's the way it's going to happen. But my guess is that Banning Ranch will continue to be an issue as you go through the planning process for this general plan. And you have some very directed policies with regard to Banning Ranch. If we can't acquire it, let's at least preserve as much habitat as possible. I think there was even a limit put on how many residential units could be built. So that's the kind of detail that is actually provides a lot of good direction for a planning process. Dorothy, you mentioned implementation. You spent a lot of time going through implementation. I would encourage to use the process that I just described again to say, still, have we done it? Great, let's take it off the list. Is it still relevant? Something important? Yes. Is it something that's just too wacky or will never be funded? If we don't think it's ever going to be funded, let's take it.
So you're referring back to goals and policies matrix? Is that what you're referring back to?
Actually, I would put together a goals and policies matrix, but you also have a separate
Oh,
implementation.
yeah, I know
plan.
that.
Yeah.
Okay. But it all kind of ties together.
It all ties together,
So
right?
if you whittle down the goals and policies, then that's going to trickle,
Exactly. So if you, once you start to change goals and policies, and
change them, yeah.
because in your general plan, and this is another nice feature of it, for each of the goals and policies, it cross-references implementation measures that put those goals and policies in place, so it's going to be easier for you to figure out those linkages as you go through it. So what resources can you use to help you other than, you know what you know about Newport Beach, you know what you want to accomplish in Newport Beach. But something that I find really powerful when I'm working on a general plan, when I go to community meetings, it's important that people speak from their heart, but I also appreciate it when they speak from their heads and they have facts to back up what they're proposing or what they're presenting. And so I think anything that you can do to start to arm yourselves with facts to make arguments, maybe that's not quite the right word to use, but to press a point. There is a lot of information out there that you might find helpful. And before I go to these couple of slides, there's one really important one that I don't have a website site for you right now, but I'm a member of an organization called the California Planning Roundtable. And has anybody mentioned this particular group before in any of your other meetings? It's a group of planners throughout the state, from public sector, private sector, state organizations, universities. And a number of years ago, the project that the Roundtable took on was to put together a general plan guide that showed best practices for the general plan. And there are a number of different general plans in there that talk about good techniques to use in updating a general plan. I think Fullerton is actually in there. So is Riverside. I don't know if Brea is or not. I think it was probably done too far in the past. But I will get you that website site because that is a good one just to start to familiarize yourself with what works really well in a general plan, all the way from the community engagement at the beginning to the implementation program at the end. And so that, I think that would be a nice resource to take a look at. But there are several others that sort of resources that you can use to help you get up to speed and to get facts to back up what you'd like to accomplish. The first being the general plan guidelines. The State Office of Planning and Research just published an updated version of a document that was, I think it dated back to 2003. The 2018 guidelines talk about what has to be in a general plan, but it also has a lot of great suggestions on how to do engagement. Melanie, have you guys talked about the guidelines before? Okay.
Not really.
Okay, and they're easy to get to on this website. You don't have to worry about writing it down. We'll get all this information out to you later. I don't know why sites are so long. And then the top one, and I couldn't find it on the city's website, but somebody might know where it is. Every year, the city is required to do a status report on the general plan to the state, largely to talk about how you've been accomplishing housing goals, but just generally, are you moving forward with your general plan? Has anybody, yes?
I have a question about that. Do you know if anybody ever looks at that?
Yes, and thank you for asking that question. I'll give you $10 later for that. Many cities in years past just said, hey, that's not going to do it. Nobody looks at it. It doesn't mean anything. There was legislation that was adopted last year that became effective this January, which pretty much says if you don't send the state your general plan status report every year, we're going to start cracking the whip on grants and loans to cities. So you may find yourself ineligible for certain programs that the state has because you're not reporting back to us. So there has been a markedly uptick in cities and counties sending their annual reports to the state. And the state is looking at that. And it's largely because of the housing crisis that California is facing and finding ways to better spend money at the state level and to help address address the housing needs in communities.
Do you know if there's a grace period or something? Because there was, that issue came up in the city of Newport Beach. We saw their update and felt that it was just the old shove the same forms out. And then without spending a lot of time on it, it appeared there was some kind of grace period or something.
There was, and I don't remember what it was. They're due April 1st of every year, and I think because of the new state law, the state wanted to make sure that people were given carrots instead of sticks, and so they may have decided to leave a little bit more wiggle room in there. But yes, the state is really cracking down now and saying we do want to see those, and it's going to make a difference if you don't turn one in. And again, I couldn't find it on the city's website, but I'm sure it's there if you dig around, or if you go to the planning department, they should have copies. With regard to this word, Alan, you might want to plug your ears, growth, people might want to know what projected growth is, not just in Newport Beach, but through all of Orange County, because no matter what each individual city does or the county as a whole, there will be pressures for growth. And every year, the California State University Fullerton Center for Demographic Research, this is a great website. They talk about growth pressures in Orange County, and you can start to see data as to where growth is anticipated to occur, how many people, how demographics might shift. Is it an aging population? Are there going to be more school children? And I think that will help give you some data for understanding how Newport Beach might grow despite what your land use policy is, that there will be pressures on the community, and that might help provide some information to you on that. Other resources to use include resources having to do with traffic, with wildlife, with environmental issues, and I apologize if that website got obscured, and then also public health. So let me start in the upper left-hand corner there. The California Highway Patrol collects accident data from all communities, and it's published, so you can find out how many car-on-car accidents, car-on-bicycle, bicycle-bicycle, pedestrian, I mean, any permutation of accidents you can find on the CHP website. They're great maps, pretty easy data to use, and what you might be able to use that information for is understanding where the pressures are on your roadway system, where unsafe conditions might be, and where traffic might need to be slowed, where an intersection might need to be improved, where new crosswalks might need to be put in, where safer bike lanes. So I love that website.
Do you know if the data that they collect is from the insurance companies, or is it from the agencies, the police agencies?
It's supposed to be from the police departments. They ask the police and sheriff departments to provide that data.
There's a large number of accidents and things that go on that have no police report. Are those picked up anyplace else?
That's a good question that I don't know the answer to, but yeah, a lot of people are afraid
The
to.
insurance companies, of course, would know about it because they're the ones that pay the claims.
Yeah, is anybody in the insurance industry in the room? Nobody's fessing up. Okay. Any attorneys in the room? They usually don't raise their hands either. For those interested in bugs and bunnies and all the critters that are in Newport Beach, there is the California Natural Diversity Database that could bring you up to speed on where there are sensitive species, sensitive habitats. Again, it's very nicely mapped data. You're a GIS specialist, aren't you? You probably know of some of these websites.
Oh, yeah.
Cal Virus Screen, which is being screened out right now, this is a fairly recent website, and I was looking through the data. Most of it is not relevant to Newport Beach, but this is looking at exposures of people to things like diesel, particulate matter, poor air quality, things that had an adverse impact on people's health. And I know you can't see this map very well, but this is Newport Beach here, and all the light colors mean that air is pretty good down here, and there's not much you have to worry about. If you were to shift it up to other areas, you can see the darker areas as there are higher exposure levels to pollutants in the air and in the ground and elsewhere. So if you're interested in identifying areas that probably need some extra attention, that would be the website to go to. The last one that I mentioned here is the California Department of Public Health. again, I looked at these maps, and Newport Beach doesn't have too much concern with higher risks of asthma, diabetes, heart attacks, other things that are personal health related. But if you're just curious to know what the cancer rates might be in Newport Beach, it might not drill down to that level because there is some sensitive data that are there, but this is a great website to go to for public health data. And you might think, well, how is that relevant to a general plan? So many plans that I've been working on in recent years have incorporated public health considerations into the planning process, because you might, there's a clear relationship that if you can walk someplace, you might be healthier because you're out walking and you don't have to drive your car. So the way you arrange your land use patterns, or the way that you make sure that people have access to alternative modes of transportation, can affect the health of a community. And so you'll see some general plans. If you want your general plan to address that, understanding what some of the health considerations are would be important for the process. And really, I know I'm catching you off guard here, but you probably have other websites or mapping sources that you might want to share with the group later, either today or...
Absolutely come up with a list.
And most of these are real easy to use, easy to access, and then easy to look at the maps and the other data once you get to the websites. All right, so you've talked at a lot of your meeting anyway, from community outreach to how you dissect the plan and get to say what we want to say, to the importance of implementation. But once your plan is adopted, how do you make sure that your decision makers are accountable and the plan is really serving the function that you set it out to be? How can it be most useful to not just residents, but to the business community as well, and to visitors to your community? The days of a paper general plan that's many, many, many pages are over. I think, folks, sorry, death of books with your Kindle. There's the death of your general plan with now there are interactive general plans. And I would recommend that if you're talking to your council about what you want your general plan to look like, that you push for an online general plan, because that's just the way folks are going to operate in the future. I poo-pooed it at first just because I love picking up things. I'm such a bibliophile. I have to touch things to be able to read them. But let me show you one, and I don't have the interactive version of it up, but I'm going to give you the website in the end. We worked a couple of years ago on a general plan for the community of Hayward up in Northern California, East Bay community around Oakland. And they made a very conscious decision when they were writing the plan that it needed to be a web-based plan. That's how they decided to put it together. So this is the Hayward general plan. It doesn't look like this. It looks like this. But you can see that you've got land use and mobility, circulation, economic development, safety, natural resources, education, community health. I mentioned community health is an issue that more and more plans are addressing. That's what Hayward has done. So they had wanted to make the plan accessible to people depending on where they're placed in communities. If you're a resident, a business owner, maybe a developer, somebody who's interested in sustainability, depending on who you are and what you're interested in, the plan makes it easy to use that way. It also makes it easier for decision makers when they have a project in front of them to do research on the general plan, or at least the staff. My guess is your city council probably isn't reading the general plan when they have decisions in front of them. Their staff does a really good job of putting staff reports together, but they could if they wanted to. This makes it easier. What I like about this plan in particular is the implementation program. So if you were to click on the implementation tab, it would take you to a page that looks like this with a drop-down menu here that says, I am a resident. And so if it tells me if I'm a resident, it will bring up, for example, I'm in land use, I'm a resident, it would bring up all of the program names from the goals and the policies to the implementation measures that would be of interest to me for a particular topic area. It makes it very easy to use and do research about making sure that, hey, parking. That decision the council made about parking, let me look in the plan and see what it says about parking. And you could go back and look at all the policies and implementation measures on parking pretty easily. So if you want to take a look at the Hayward General Plan, that is its website. And I would encourage you to poke around, because that will be something that you might want to recommend. Yes, ma'am?
And would that cross-reference public or commercial use of land that would impact residential as well?
Not necessarily. What it would do is just talk about what the city's policies are with regard to that. But if you wanted, if you had a particular project that you were interested in.
Like say people that live near Fashion Island, so then Fashion Island's commercial and retail and whatever, and how that might impact residential there in that vicinity, let's say.
Probably not to that level of detail. It would at least give policy direction if you wanted to understand the impact of the plan. That's something that would be examined through the planning process. You're probably familiar with the term environmental impact report for EIR. That will be something inherent in your update of your general plan, is to understand not just what your policies are, but what the consequences or outcomes might be of that policy direction as well. So I don't know, Melanie, if you're going to have a discussion on the EIR at all.
We haven't so far.
Yeah, it's kind of dry stuff. You don't wake up in the morning thinking, hey, let's talk about the EIR. But that's something that you might want to consider talking about at some point.
Especially pitfalls based on projects that people have been involved with and seen how the report uses data, I don't know, to secure, get what they want. And when you really look at it, you see that, you know what I mean, it's kind of...
That's the importance of having your own data and understanding what the report says. The EIR has to be a factual disclosure document. It's not promoting a project one way or another, and that's something that you'll need to remember as this process unfolds, is that you need to make sure that it's accurately presenting what the consequences might be of a particular policy call.
But it seems like they also generalize or decide on things. I just want to point out one thing in particular in the Community of East Club with Coronado Stadium. They did those decibel meters around the neighborhood, and they stated that the loudspeaker system didn't matter because the residents were all already living in a community that had decibel levels that far exceeded, due to the airport and due to the Jamboree Road traffic, that it wouldn't matter to add anything because we were already far exceeded what is normal for a residential community. Where I just thought that was a weird holiday that we should, welcome more noise since we're already experiencing a lot of noise.
I think what it was probably saying, and not having actually read it, is it may not be noticeable because of the existing ambient level. Although noise is additive.
There's a cumulative effect on you.
We can't use all that stuff is different.
That's the kind of things that you need to call into discussion when a report like that comes out. Dennis, can I take a moment in front of you?
They did a project, Irvine did a project of 500 new apartments that were right at Jamboree and Fashion Island, right at Jamboree and
San Joaquin Hills.
And they did an environmental impact. They got in underneath the general plan, the original one back in '06. But nobody ever does an environmental impact after it's been built.
Because it's not required by law. Is probably the silly answer that I'm going to give you. You're not required to go back and test whether or not the conclusions that were made were correct.
Change the law, right?
I rest my case. What the law does require is that before a project is allowed to move forward, that you study what the anticipated impacts might be based on a noise study or a traffic study or an aesthetic study or a health risk assessment. And those types of studies are based on good, solid data from prior work. So presumably they're going to accurately report what the impact might be.
Then it becomes cumulative, as we were talking about, because, okay, so the people over there by the high school where they want to put this stadium, they get jets right overhead, so that's supposed to be that it's okay to put a stadium in there, along with, because the decimal level will come, it's just as bad as the jets that are overhead. I mean, the cars that were added to San Joaquin and to Jamboree, 1,000 cars, because there were 500 apartments. And there are probably 2 people living in them with 2 cars. And you cannot find a place in Fashion Island to park anymore. It is impacted. And it has impacted Jamboree, it's impacted the whole area. And nobody will ever come back and say, gee, was that really a good idea? Well, we're just going to get more of the same. They wanted to put a big tower in the middle of Fashion Island for condos. And the city council approved it because they changed, I guess, the general plan, essentially.
That's right.
And, we had to get, what was it, 1,500,000?
We got 16,000 signatures.
16,000 signatures.
We didn't need that many, but that's what we got.
We worked to get that thing recalled. There was no environmental impact that was going to be okay either when they were still building the places on San Joaquin. At the same time, they were building those up. And it's like they just arose like this.
So November 6th is coming up.
So just as kind of a side note on the cumulative impacts, when a project is being examined, the environmental document is required to look at cumulative impacts as well. So it's not just the project in isolation, but are there other things that are planned that have to be added to that? And the question of whether a project will have cumulative impacts is important as well. Jim over here, and then over here. Who's over here?
So,
or not Jim, Dennis.
Going back slightly to the EIR, reading an EIR, one of the things that, for me, I've discovered that you learn how to read an EIR, that you don't sit down and read chapter after chapter after chapter. You focus in. So I am actually, we'll talk later, but I am going to propose maybe that we do actually a workshop on reading EIRs to show people how to streamline it. Without going into a lot of detail, do you have tips, or are there tips of ways to approach what can be a fairly massive and dull document rather than page 1, page 2? How do you do it? I mean, you have some tricks?
The thing that I look for most in an EIR is, was it clearly describing what the condition is today, what the new project will add, what is the threshold for impact, and will there be an impact? So an EIR has to make that logical chain of examination. Today, tomorrow, the threshold that I'm judging that condition against, and is that significant or not? That's what I would focus to make sure that the discussion lays itself out that way for each of the topic areas. And you've got to wade through a lot of stuff sometimes to get there. There's a lot of background,
tables of data.
Reams.
It's easy to kill somebody with data with an EIR. This is a little known fact, and I'm still advocating for it, but there's a tiny little piece of state law that says an EIR should not be more than 150 pages long.
Interesting.
I think nobody adheres to that anymore. And it's just because of the way the case law has developed over time. It's like you never pull something away, you just keep adding on to it. And there's never been an attempt to, anyway, that's a whole other discussion on EIRs. I'd be happy to come talk to you about EIRs too.
And I was thinking going online exponentially probably makes it worse because you can hypertext and go to other sources. If you take an EIR, like for Banny Ranch, we were saying we would try to go through and look at charts, and it must have been, in real paper, something like that. It was just impossible to make sense of it. I have 2 questions. One regarding the Hayward site. Is there if I were to go to that site right now, is there a tutorial for the public to go to sites like this that help you understand the color coding, or do you have to sit there and figure out how to use the site? That was the first question. The second one was, does that site, the Hayward site, promote chat rooms where when there's a discussion like from this woman right here, all that information about what happened with Fashion Island and the increased traffic, is there a chat room where you can go to Fashion Island, like a follow-up follow-up EIR on the current building in Fashion Island, where the public can start connecting and networking? So does the site promote that kind of discussion?
My easy answers, or short answer, no and no.
Oh,
No, but I love your idea. I'm going to take that back to the office with me of a tutorial of, if you're not familiar with how to use something like this, what can be done to make it easier for the public to use it. There's no secret to the color coding, but I think your point is, can you make it easier? With regard to the chat room, no, because a general plan like this is a static document, and it's just like going to the library and checking something out. I guess the library, you could go off into the next room and talk to somebody else about it. But for a case like this, no, it's just something to read. But if you want to have discussion about it, it would be outside of this forum. Yes, ma'am.
Back to what this lady was saying, and I don't know, strategically would it work, and also it may be cost prohibitive, but to maybe take an EIR, yes.
Just think of EIO, but
And anyway, take it and then do a after the fact and compare the two, and then make a presentation saying, well, this is what we were sold before, and this is how it's resulted. We're very leery on.
That would be a wonderful exercise. I've not seen somebody do that before, but let's take, for example, a project that had an EIR, it was built, and you could go back and look at and match it against what was predicted and use that data the next time a project comes up. And that's hopefully what I'm getting across today, is that having data is really important and powerful when you're trying to make arguments. Where all the increased planning hasn't been so data-driven as it is now. It is more from the heart. But I think if you can use the facts to your advantage, it's hard to argue with it.
There is a section on the EIR. It has to go far beyond the reading of it. Because I think too many of us think that the title means something. Oh, environmental impact report. Oh, it's on my side, and it's not. And to understand what the whole purpose of it is, and how you have overrides, and how you can have impacts, and how you mitigate it, I think it's a much more comprehensive thing than just, this is how you read the chapters or something. Because it's like, if you don't understand what the point of it is and all the ins and outs of it, then just reading it doesn't mean anything. You think, oh, it says there's an impact, and you go, yeah, they just overrode that. So.
And what I'm sorry, what's your name?
Nancy.
Nancy, what Nancy's referring to is that if an environmental document does identify a significant impact that can't be mitigated or dealt with in some manner, decision makers do have the ability under the law to say there are overriding reasons for approving the project, despite the fact that it's going to have significant impacts. And you have to clearly identify what those overriding reasons are. Yes, sir.
We seem to, Carl, we should have moved into a question and answer.
We're in question and answer.
Let me ask you two questions, because this has come up. How salient and compelling is having a focused legislative body, the council, plan for the enactment of a general plan? We don't get, in other words, if we don't get an elected general council that's going to pay attention to us anyway, why are we here? I mean, you work with Manhattan Beach. I mean, if we're going to go through another 4 years, and we're going to, you understand? Am I communicating my question?
Absolutely.
What's your experience?
That's a deep philosophical question.
I mean, if our focus for question number one seems to be is how we're going to get the city council changed. Is that not, or have you seen another way to do it?
You're asking me to tread into waters that I usually but in most cases, I've seen councils support the plan that a community's developed. If you have a council that is not supporting or acting in a manner consistent with the vision that's been set forth.
That's what I'm trying to say. What we've heard in the last, as recent as 6 months, 6 months ago, is that we're not going to take action on general plan because we're waiting for guidance from the state legislature on affordable housing.
RENA numbers.
On read it.
Yeah, read more specific.
Oh,
Thank
okay,
you.
now you're getting to that's not a bad argument for them to take. It's a little weaning out, if you will. But let me, for the whole group, every roughly now 8 years, every city, it rotates around the state, but for the whole Southern California Association of Governments region is given a target for new housing. For the region that you're in your housing element, which addresses that, it's here, 2013, it was adopted, and it covers a planning period from 2013 to 2021.
Right.
You are not required to update this again until to have a new adopted housing element in 2021. Many cities are starting to plan now for this period because they want to make sure that, and I'm going to use some words that I don't mean what I'm saying, but their housing assignment, if you will, for all of the growth in the Southern California Association of Governments or SCAG region, there's predicted growth. And each city and county is required to absorb its fair share. The process now of allocating those units has started with SCAG, and so it's important for your community to be watching that process. I think your allocation last time was 5. That's like nothing. I'm working in Desert Hot Springs right now. I think their allocation is 4,400. So you need to watch and monitor that process. So the argument of we're going to wait until our housing allocation comes out, that's starting up now. Yes, go ahead. Oh, wait, Carl, you had a second
Well, I had a
question.
second. Go ahead. I defer, and I'd like to come back to the second.
How is that allocation determined? I thought 5 was just crazy when I saw it. And how did they decide that Newport Beach only had to have 5 more houses?
If this were square, it's like this. It's a black box. How does that? That's what that process is. It has been a black box that not many people have understood. That's not going to happen anymore. The SCAG is being much more open about how that allocation occurs. It's based on vacancy. It's based on housing production. And it's all, and I don't know the ins and outs of it, so I can't answer your question directly other than it's been somewhat mysterious, and that mysteriousness is going to be peeled back this time so that people can better understand why you got 5 and Costa Mesa got 2 and Desert Hot Springs got 4,400. Carl, your other question?
Does it have anything to do with political power?
No. Not that I've seen. And there's horse trading. For example, Long Beach, because they wanted to grow during the last cycle, said, we're going to absorb more growth. So, Seal Beach, give us some of your units because we don't care. We'll take
So
them.
they can be horse traded?
They can be horse traded, but it's got to be mutual. Carl, and then over here. And then,
I'll defer to Ms. Gardner. Oh,
Okay.
I wanted to follow up on what she had to say about reading and what Dennis was saying about the EIRs. In your experience, have you worked in Manhattan Beach or you're in Desert Hot Springs now? Anyway, I feel for you.
it's not a bad place.
Anyway, as opposed to being in Newport Beach.
It's a little different. Yeah, it's a little hot.
Anyway, we have, in other cities, do you have citizen advisory committees where you have citizen advisory committees that have a duty, or in some cases maybe even a fiduciary duty, to advise council? Have you ever seen those committees get involved in like what Dennis is talking about, Nancy, in reading the EIRs and going beyond the EIRs to purposefully provide another look other than staff to the legislative body, to the
Before
council?
you start, let me give you the Newport Beach answer to that. That we had a group like that called the Environmental Quality Affairs Committee. And they went through very carefully EIRs, and they made their comments on it. And it was sort of abolished because the city attorney said that if someone wanted to fight the EIR, to have residents, a city council appointed group commenting and supporting the antagonist argument, that made it way too strong. And so they didn't want that kind of commenting anymore. They said they could comment on a notice of preparation, but not on the EIR itself. They didn't want that in the record.
And the point is that an environmental document is a city's document. The city is responsible for what it says. And it's usually staff who are the technical experts. The only other case where I'm familiar with is something similar to what Nancy's mentioning is in Seal Beach. And they don't have a lot of environmental documents that are prepared, but they have something called the Environmental Quality Review Board, I think, that does look at...
We need a new commission.
So it's something that's the only place that I know where they've done that. And it's not really advising. It's just taking a second look at what the information says. It's kind of odd. In fact, it's not really kosher to have a internal city body commenting on a document that's the city's document. The place to do it is before it becomes public.
That's what I was asking for your experience. So if I look at Congress, U.S. Congress, they form committees, and that's where the hearings are held. And so legislation comes by committee. Whereas in Newport Beach, you have a bunch of individual citizens coming before the council, okay? And as I'm not a lawyer, but as I understand, Justice Holmes said that when you come before a legislative body as a single group, you're not heard with the same voice. And so I can see why Newport Beach would disband the committee. But if the committee's already in place and it has a, so I was looking for some experience somewhere else where that body is already formed and has a responsibility, and there's counsel on the committee itself. It would seem to me that's the place that someone else has had this idea that you do your EIR evaluation at the committee level, similar to what's done in the U.S. Congress.
Seal Beach is the only community that I can think of that does that now. There are other communities where I've worked where Planning Commission is actually the body charged with certifying an EIR, meaning saying, yes, the information in here is sound and accurately represents the impacts. It's not approving a project, it's just saying, yes, this is a good statement of facts. And so sometimes that is removed from the council. And so a recommendation goes to the council that that document represents the facts.
Make sure she gets through a presentation.
So it's possible to do that.
Because I can wait on my...
Do you want, would any of these questions be answered in the rest of your presentation, or are you pretty much at the...
Oh, I'm here for question and answer now.
Oh, okay. I just want to make sure that we weren't chopping you off.
No. In fact, I'll go to the end slide that says...
Oh, then that's cool. Well, then it's good timing. So then I have a question.
I've been waiting for it all day.
Yeah, I wanted to actually have a couple very quick. Okay, so one of the things is you mentioned the elements, but I didn't hear anything about sustainability element.
Not required under the law, but that is another one that we are seeing many cities do today.
I saw it on the Hayward.
Hayward had it. It either is a standalone element or interwoven throughout the plan, either way.
Okay. So
sustainability and resilience. I'm working in Burlingame right now, which sits on San Francisco Bay, and they're concerned about sea level rise, and so there's a resilience part of it.
We also.
Yeah.
Okay. Then the other thing was as a consultant, as a firm, and even though you weren't here the last time around, you can pick how you want to answer this. I'm wondering about pressures on consultants, you or just in general on consultants, when you're doing, because general plans are political. I mean, they have certainly have political overtones. And so you can go through this whole process, you have all your outreach and that, but then you can have, we're paying your bill type, city council saying, we don't like that. So I'm just wondering how, if you do, not you personally, but as this business, if there are those pressures, and how you, if they are, how do you deal with it?
The role of a consultant in doing a general plan is to get broad outreach from the community, hear a lot of voices, but ultimately it's going to be staff and the council giving direction on what goes into that plan. And that's our responsibility to our client, is to reflect what the decision makers are putting forward, as long as it's not illegal or immoral or unethical.
Yeah, so just to follow up slightly, so in the last general plan that we had update, there's actually video, Alan has it and so on, there's actually video where people who were involved in the process basically figuratively left the room because they were angry because what they had thought was going to go in and work to go in and everything else disappeared. And so that explains that call. You can say, we don't want it.
It's the purview of the decision makers to give that direction.
So, have you seen committee groups hire their own consultant to be the interface or to help make sure that the message is carried forward?
Absolutely.
Like someone?
I want to go back to a comment on EIRs and how do you, because that's one thing, maybe I'll stand up, that's one thing that we've chatted about in these workshops is baseline conditions. So a project comes in and it's going to add 500 cars, they've got 5 mitigation measures to fix it. How do you know if those mitigation measures actually worked? Nobody's come back in later on, done that secondary analysis, and by gosh, it's actually 800 cars. What do you do? And so that theme has come up, but my experience in Brea, I think most of you know this, I sit on the planning commission there, and there's parking management plans and circulation plans that we adopt as part of our decision with the project, so that if there is a problem in the future, and I think parking is a good example with Fashion Island, that if they've allowed for 250 parking spaces, but 300 cars are trying to park there, what do they do? And so there are ways to fix that. You hire a company to come shuttle people from one place to another. There's all sorts of things that can go into it. So I think it's, and I don't know if you want to comment on those types of plans that can get added to documents, but
Sure.
I think that might be helpful to this discussion.
And that works for something at a project-specific level. Most projects that have a discretionary decision associated with them, a permit that's required, there are conditions put on the project to do exactly what Melanie's saying, is to say, you have to do a parking audit a year from now to prove that your parking is working. And if it's not, you fix it. So you need to look at conditions of approval on a project to make sure that there's accountability and a check on making sure that what was said is actually happening.
And I'll add on to that, because a lot of folks, I have so many hats that I wear. Some of them are fighting hats where there's litigation involved. But one thing we did when we thought a project in Brea was going to go through was we handed a list of conditions of approval to a council member that we knew kind of was sitting on our side because of the dangerous nature of this site for this particular housing development. And so there were things that we said, if it's going to get approved, see if you can work these in, which alleviated some of our concerns. And so that would have been a helpful step. So it's not necessarily just hiring somebody to carry your message forward, but it could be working with a council member who you know is receptive to your cause or this particular issue to get them to hear some of the concerns you have and what solutions might be.
So Melanie, who's on point to follow up that those conditions were followed? How does that loop close?
So I can only speak to Brea, but it's the planning staff. So
okay, well,
yeah. But that doesn't mean you as a resident couldn't do know it. I mean, you mark it on your calendar.
I mean, it's just like, that's a lot of us, that's all we do is watch what's going
Babysit.
on. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Follow up to that, as far as the conditions of approval, is that something, I'm thinking of like the museum tower or something, if that would have gotten passed, is that something the developer would have been obligated to have
done.
a follow-up traffic study? And then that information would have been published and the city would have had some teeth to be able to say, okay, it was over and we can plan B or plan C.
There's actually something under environmental law that requires that follow-up. If there are mitigation measures in an environmental document to avoid or lessen the impacts, a plan is put together to monitor those mitigation measures. Mitigation monitoring and reporting plan is required under the law. And the city is responsible for doing a checklist. Usually the developer pays for it because it's a burden on the city, but staff, I haven't seen this, but some cities will pay folks to be mitigation monitors. Or, the developer pays the city and the city turns around and hires somebody to monitor.
What leverage do citizens actually have? It seems like what always happens with the most recent projects I can think of, it's all or nothing. In other words, we're just fighting, and then it's either it gets passed or it doesn't get passed. We never got to that point where we're actually kind of negotiating the.
So I would say, based on my experience, I don't know if you want to throw ideas in here, but some of my best experiences in working with developers, and I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, is when you actually sit down with them and say, look, here are the 5 concerns we have. Here are ideas to solve it. And then that beats having to raise $100,000 or $200,000 to fight something in the courts where they may just make text changes to the EIR and you still have the same project. So if there's a way to resolve it before you get to the fight, and we had that presentation, I think it was the one with Jennifer Lilly and Pete Peterson, where it was, if you're trying to argue something related to the project at the podium during public comments, you've missed your chance. Your window is closed. So I think we're seeing a shift in some of these. I know meetings have happened on Newport Crossings. I know meetings have happened on Mariners Mile. So one happened on the Cole Center. It just comes down to how flexible that developer is.
At my house.
Yes, that's
I'm
right.
working in Monrovia on several projects now, and it is required that the developer fund a meeting with the public to talk about a project before it even gets submitted, essentially. And I don't know if the city has it codified, or they just simply say, you know what, we're not even going to take your application in until you've had this meeting with the neighbors.
And where was that?
On Monrovia.
I would like it if you could give us some help on the problem of controversial things. There are many things in this town which are extremely controversial, and there can be a lot of controversy about what goes into the general plan. And the general rule seems to be that, well, you'll take and compromise the two sides and put a mush into the general plan that doesn't really say anything. And is there some way in which we can be a little bit clearer about it?
I think having a committee like you had before, the General Plan Advisory Committee, is the opportunity to hash those things out. And if there are two sides of the story to be told, to see if one side can prevail or there is a compromise that actually works. I think having a committee helps those discussions occur at a very grassroots level. So I would recommend having a General Plan Advisory Committee again. It's just the public process that if there are two opposing ways to do things, sometimes it has to be compromised, not one or the other. That's not a good...
Why do it have to be compromised? Why can't we say, we want it to be this kind of city, and that's what we're going to do, and if it's majority, we do it?
That's the big, it comes down in the end to the council. And if the council recognizes that as the majority voice, that's the direction they'll head. They've been elected to make those decisions.
Well, and what if the majority is not on your side? That's the flip side. So you're hoping that they're lining up with your goals, but when they don't, they're lining up with somebody else's. So you've got both sides of that majority.
That's why we want compromise.
That's the critical thing you said earlier, is that we have to wait till we have a council that will support the residents, perhaps.
I'm going to step out on a limb here. There may be, well, there are a lot of residents in Newport Beach, and what you'll find is that the council will not always make decisions for the group of residents that you side with.
Right.
Right.
Very tactical.
I saw a hand, somebody who hadn't spoken yet here. No? Jim, and then Dennis.
You obviously prepared very well for this meeting, looking carefully at our general plan. And I assume in looking at the land use element, we saw we have very detailed tables in there setting development limits on the areas that are called anomalies on our map.
I did. That was a very puzzling piece of information.
For us too.
I thought if you had so many anomalies, how are they anomalies?
Same with variance. Variance becomes the norm.
If there are too many, you have a question, let me point that. If there are too many variances, there's something wrong with your development regulations.
You have something wrong with the planning commission and the city staff behind the planning commission and the city attorney behind the planning commission and the city council behind all of those governmental agencies.
So Jim was talking.
Jim, I didn't let you finish your question.
The example of the question is we have those tables. The riddle, which is not evident from reading the general plan, is the reason for those tables is we have a slow growth measure dating from 2000, a ballot measure voted by the people, that is supposed to limit the growth based on the limits that are in the general plans. Those are kind of carried over from earlier general plan, but in that table, and a cynical view of why the 2006 general plan amendment happened, which the organization was involved only in the visioning part at the very beginning, was it allowed the council en masse to reset all the development limits throughout the city, because those tables were put on the ballot as part of the general plan amendment in 2006. So all of those got reset, whereas they were supposed to be cumulative totals towards the limit. When they went over a certain amount, the voters are supposed to be able to vote on individual areas. So my question is kind of in two parts. Is seeing the table like that very unusual for you to see in the general plan? And people here, we might be wanting to revitalize our general plan and update it without having to change those tables, because we don't want to reset all of them to a new base level. I'm perhaps not explaining it very clearly. But you can you see things in our general plan that could be and need to be updated? It could be done without changing those tables so the development limits stay where they are.
I'll answer that in one general way. Those can absolutely be kept in the plan if that's the will of ultimately the council. And that, my guess is that will probably be a large discussion about the general plan. Are those the appropriate limits, and do we want to keep those? If the choice is made to keep those, they could be, and you can still update the general plan to address other issues that are important to you. If there are sustainability policies that you want to put into the plan, or if you want to revisit the bike plan, There are certain things that you're going to have to do under state law once you open up the plan. You're going to have to address something called complete streets, meaning you'll have to look at the way the streets function and making sure that it's all modes of mobility are well accommodated. You'll have to address environmental justice. There's some new flooding issues, so there are things that you will have to address, things that you can address, and there are things that you can keep exactly the way they are if you want. Does that answer your question? And there are other ways of quote, limiting development, if you will. I'm going to turn to your neighbor Costa Mesa again, is their key concern in parts of the city is traffic generation, particularly, I think it was the southwest area. And they wanted to put limits on growth just so the traffic wouldn't get any worse. And they had a really weird tiered system that they had to keep track of generating new trips, if you will. So there are other ways of getting to the same issue. Rather than growth limits, there might be caps on vehicle trips that you might put in the plan.
Yeah, our rule is a similar one. We kind of copied it, I think, in 2000. We have a rule when you amend the general plan, if you go over certain limits, 40,000 square feet of commercial development, 100 new homes in a little area, then the people are supposed to get a chance to vote on that. And when the entire general plan is revised and all those tables are changed with limits going up, you had to vote on it all at once and lost the right and lost the tracking of what had happened in those little areas up to that point. Because the voters, in effect,
they reset the limits.
Exactly.
Turn the odometer back to zero.
Thank you, Andy.
That's a good way of describing it.
Oh, I have it. Oh.
So I think this is easier than Jim's. At the very beginning, you mentioned about, I think you were surprised or a little bit about the detail in our existing general plan. So going forward, is detail good? Is it bad if that's not clear cut? Are there areas where detail would be maybe good and other areas where it would not be, it might be limiting or something? So just the general idea of detail.
Well, the little bit of background that Jim just provided helped me understand why your plan is as detailed as it is, that it was purposeful because of those limits. If that's what the city wants to do to make sure that you can track things, that level of detail is appropriate. Now that I understand where it comes from, I can say...
So like the anomaly tables?
Yeah.
Yeah, and those are, okay.
But because the city tried to plan at such a detailed level, you saw where I mentioned that there were a lot of general plan amendments. That's not allowing flexibility enough to react to how the market might head. It's a tough thing to do, is to figure out how much detail to put in there. But I think it all comes back to, is the detail helping us fulfill the vision that we've set out and where we want to be? Is it going to help us get to where we want to be? Dorothy.
So on the, when you were talking about you said that the allocation of housing numbers is in the works, and people are watching and looking, and so how do we keep track of that, or do we have to wait? Because I've been thinking we have to wait until someone from the city tells us they're there. But is there a way to watch that, or?
You can. It's tough to do, but you might contact somebody at the Southern California Association of Governments, SCAG, and see if they have a public way of understanding what's going on.
Okay.
They also have meetings that are for the jurisdictions, and I'm sure the public would be more than welcome to attend the meetings as well. So you might just get on the SCAG website and see what their schedule is for something called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment.
Okay.
You pronounce it as RENA or RENA.
Right. Okay.
This land use planning is all about knowing the jargon.
A lot of letters.
But I think we already know that they weren't going to tell us anything until 20-something, wasn't it?
You can know before 2021. The housing element process will be something to watch, but I think through watching the SCAG website, you can start to arm yourself with the data that you need.
So one argument was not to do the general plan until that point, because then we might add houses right now that won't count towards the arena count. And that would be adding even more people. So that was...
The arena is going to be forward-looking. Anything that's being built now is addressing your 5 units that you had prior, because the city will have to show how it's made progress towards its prior goal. And it's not just the number of housing units total, it's divided up into different income categories as well. So it's not just 5 units, it's probably 2 units for very low income. And
It was one in each.
One in each?
One in each.
One in each. There are 5 income categories. Okay. It's complicated stuff. The whole goal, I think, though, is people want housing.
So, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, so when do they actually have their numbers solidified and ready to disseminate? Even though you have your target date when you have to work, when does the state complete their action so that those numbers are ready?
Mid to late 2019, because the element has to be adopted by 2021, so you have to have your numbers, and then that gives you time to put the housing element and the plan together.
So you have at least, that would be your late date.
Yeah. The process is starting now, but about a year from now, the city probably should have its arena numbers around. So it's not as in the distant as you might think. It's more imminent.
So if we had only 5, is that what we got last time, was 5?
Yes.
Have we done it?
I think so, but what can we expect with the demand? I mean,
More than 5?
I'm assuming that.
But what I have heard is that most cities should expect a significant, or I'll use the term substantial, bump in their allocation for this next planning period.
Has anyone ever,
Thank you.
Has anyone from a city who actually just wanted to go online and see evaluated what the actual quote-unquote cost would be if they said, we as a city have decided we do not want to comply with this. We'll do some building, but we're not going to do 5,000 units, thank you. And they say, okay, well, it's going to cost you so much, and then you evaluate what the actual cost is and other ways you could potentially save to pay for that cost.
When city councils actually ask, what is the penalty, if you will, the consequence of not having a housing element that's been...
No, you can have a housing element.
No, I mean, that's been certified. It's been certified by the state. So if you say to heck with you, we're not going to connect that to the units. There are 2 key consequences. The first is that the city is pretty much automatically not eligible for loans and grants through the State Department of Housing and Community Development. So you won't get assistance, nor would developers be able to get assistance. The second, and this is the more, oh my God, consequence, is that somebody could sue and say, Newport Beach, you do not have an adequate general plan because your housing element hasn't been certified by the state. And a court could say, guess what, you can't issue any building permits whatsoever because you don't have a general plan that is adequate under the state. So it could stop issuance of any type of building permit, not just housing. I don't know of a case where that's happened, but those are always the 2 things that I tell city councils. You had another question?
Totally different topic. As I mentioned in my comments at the beginning, the city is about to get a new city manager who has a long career in the finance department of the city of Sunnyvale. And Sunnyvale, from what I gather, is recognized for innovation from the 1970s and 80s in what is called performance-based budgeting, where instead of just kind of as Newport Beach does, kind of adopt each year budget reform that sets goals for the departments, and they have to, kind of like a business model, and they have to meet their objectives for the year for their budget to be increased or decreased based on that. And I gathered from the planning Roundtable website that Sunnyvale had a general plan that's kind of innovative in some ways. Similar to that, we were mentioning Manhattan Beach, where the general plan is tied into their budgeting in some way. And I think the Sunnyvale one was supposed to be innovative and that all of the council decisions, not just about planning things that relate to policies and goals and anything on that. And maybe recently found, even during our new city manager's tenure there, that was a little too complicated to actually put into practice. But could you tell us a little bit more about the Manhattan Beach and your experience with it? Because I think our new city manager, being a financial person, and the general plan update being under her tenure is going to be very interested in that kind of thing. Can you tell us a little bit more about Manhattan Beach, whether that's good, bad, or...
Sure. Well, what was important in Manhattan Beach for any general plan is it's not just a planning document. All city departments need to be engaged in the planning process. And so for the Manhattan Beach general plan, it wasn't just about land use. It was about circulation, it was about recreation programming, it was about park space, about infrastructure. And so every department had its say in the general plan and what went into the implementation plan. They were key to putting that together. And so the way the city council uses it, though, is they said, when we adopted this general plan, this is what we said our goals are. And so we are going to be planning expenditures based on what our goals are. And so they go to the plan every year to use the implementation data. And it's been 10 or 12 years now. It's the year that the Angels won the World Series. That's how I remember. That's not going to happen this year. 2002. That's when Manhattan Beach did their general plan. And so I'd like to actually go back and visit them and ask how it's still working, because I don't know, but they found it to be very effective at that time.
Yeah, I did look at some Sunnyvale recent city minutes and city council agenda and staff reports, and it didn't look like they were addressing, they were making decisions with no reference to their general plans. I have the impression maybe it didn't quite work out as they expected.
We've got about 10 more minutes. Did you have other items of business?
I have a couple of announcements to make at the end, but if you want 3 or 4 more minutes, you can have them.
Sure.
Do you do EIRs at all?
I do. Yes.
You do, okay.
It's not my favorite thing.
Well, it just bothers me that one of the candidates that was running 2 years ago said at a forum, I heard him say, that's what he did for a living, and he threw out this line that, yeah, we have budget for whatever our client is, we try not to just, he let us know that there's a lot of budget around EIR. Is that your sense of it? I thought that was pretty amazing he would say that out loud.
What I find is important for an EIR is, number one, that, for example, if it's being prepared for a private development project, that the consultant be under contract to the city, not to the developer. And I'm not sure how Newport Beach does it.
I think that's the way they do it. I think
there are very few cities that don't do it that way, and it needs to be a completely separate relationship. City, EIR, consultant. A lot of times the developer will prepare his or her own technical reports, which the EIR consultant will review and use their own expertise. So that separation is very important for the public trust, and just to make sure that there's that the data say what they should say, and the conclusions are sound.
We have our own city council. Our own city wants to do certain things too that may be the same, be in line with the developer. So I don't know if that's always so much of a... I just don't feel that a lot of the EIRs are developed with that kind of independence that we'd like to see. But I guess I'm wrong. Hopefully I'm wrong.
They should be.
They should be, yes.
I think we have the impression, like I mentioned, we have the senior home here, which the EIR was released last week for a public review period. But I think we have the impression that before the public sees it for review, the city staff kind of reviews it with the developer for their tweaks and comments to it. And not that they're in charge of writing that, but they get kind of a private review before the public does. Is that your experience?
I've seen cities do it both ways. If a city does allow a developer to look at the EIR before it goes public, they what I would advise is they say, we're just looking to make sure that the factual information about the project is correct. That you're not getting input on any of the conclusions, but is the project described appropriately? Is the construction period described appropriately? But not weighing in on any of the conclusions or anything. But most communities I've worked in, the developer is looking at it at the same time the rest of the public is. Not this early look-see before it goes out to the public. If anybody has any other questions, I'm at my desk a lot, so I'm happy to have anybody call me.
You probably shouldn't have said that, because I wrote it right down. How to reach you.
Melanie reached out to me, and I'm trying to remember how she did, and when I was talking to her on the phone the first time, I said, Schlotterbeck, that is such an interesting name. I have but known only one other Schlotterbeck in my life. It was Claire Schlotterbeck.
Funny about that.
And she said, yeah, she's my mom. I said, she was involved in the Brea General Plan as a resident and as a very strong supporter and proponent of the natural environment.
Yeah.
And I think because of her mom's involvement as a resident in the general plan program, that plan really reflects the ideas that she put forward, and that was just a great process to work on that general plan because the public was so impassioned about it. And I think and hope it came through. I don't know what your mom said her experience was, but
Every day is a different day, I'll say that.
So thank you. Good luck to you as you go through the process.